A mind can remain busy and still be lifeless. Thoughts may continue to flow, opinions may form, and words may be spoken. Yet the inner light that gives meaning to thought can quietly fade. This happens when knowledge is reduced to information and wisdom is no longer sought. Without true understanding, the mind loses its depth and becomes trapped in repetition rather than insight. In this reflection, we turn toward the kind of knowledge that restores vitality to awareness. The knowledge that reconnects the mind to purpose, perception, and inner awakening. This is not knowledge that fills the memory, but knowledge that reanimates consciousness and brings the mind back to life. The silent collapse of inner awareness does not arrive with noise or warning. It unfolds gently, hidden beneath routine, familiarity, and the comfort of repetition. The mind continues to function, making decisions and forming opinions, yet something subtle withdraws. Perception becomes shallow, meaning thins out, and the depth once felt in moments of reflection quietly fades. This collapse is not dramatic, which is why it often goes unnoticed. The soul feels less engaged with reality, even though life appears unchanged on the surface. Inner awareness weakens when the mind becomes satisfied with surfaces. When words are accepted without inquiry and ideas are inherited without tasting their truth, perception slowly dulls. The mind begins to move along paths laid by habit rather than insight. Over time, this borrowed movement replaces direct seeing. What once felt alive and meaningful turns mechanical, and the mind forgets that it was created to witness, not merely to repeat. This collapse is silent because it disguises itself as normalcy. Life continues, responsibilities are met, and conversations flow, yet the inner witness grows faint. The heart no longer pauses in wonder, and the mind stops asking deeper questions. Awareness becomes confined to utility and survival, leaving little space for contemplation. In this state, the mind functions, but it does not truly live. When inner awareness collapses, the mind loses its connection to presence. Thoughts arise automatically, reactions follow predictably, and emotions move without being observed. The individual begins to experience life through reflex rather than insight. This creates distance between the soul and its own experiences. What is lived is no longer fully known, and what is known is no longer deeply felt. One of the earliest signs of this collapse is impatience with silence. Stillness begins to feel uncomfortable because it exposes the absence of inner dialogue that once carried meaning. Instead of being a place of insight, silence becomes something to escape. Noise, distraction, and constant stimulation are then used to avoid confronting the emptiness that has quietly formed within. The mind was not created merely to process information. It was shaped to recognize signs, reflect on meaning, and turn inward toward understanding. When this purpose is forgotten, the mind shrinks to a tool rather than a gateway. It becomes efficient but disconnected, sharp but blind. This is not ignorance in the outward sense, but a deeper unawareness of what the mind truly is. As inner awareness fades, certainty increases. The mind clings to fixed conclusions because questioning feels threatening. Ambiguity becomes uncomfortable, and mystery is avoided. Yet it is precisely the mystery that keeps awareness alive. When the mind closes itself to what it cannot immediately understand, it seals the door through which insight enters. The collapse does not happen because knowledge is absent, but because knowledge is reduced to possession. When knowing becomes something owned rather than lived, it loses its power to transform. The mind collects ideas, but no longer allows them to reshape perception. In this state, learning continues, but awakening does not. Inner awareness also weakens when the heart is no longer consulted. The mind separates itself from feeling, intuition, and inner resonance. Decisions are made without listening inwardly, and understanding becomes purely intellectual. This separation creates imbalance, as the mind was never meant to function alone. Awareness requires harmony between intellect and inner sensing. The soul begins to feel distant from its own thoughts. There is activity without intimacy and motion without direction. The individual may sense a vague dissatisfaction, not tied to any specific problem. This dissatisfaction is the soul recognizing that awareness has narrowed and that life is being experienced through a reduced lens. The silent collapse is reinforced by constant outward focus. When attention is always directed away from the self, inner observation weakens. Reflection is replaced by consumption, and contemplation is replaced by reaction. The mind becomes skilled at responding to the world, but forgets how to witness itself. Yet, even within this collapse, nothing is truly lost. Awareness does not disappear. It retreats. It waits quietly beneath the noise, beneath the habits, beneath the borrowed thoughts. The silence that once felt empty is actually filled with unrecognized presence. What has collapsed is not awareness itself, but attention to it. The mind often fears returning inward because it assumes nothing is there. This fear is an illusion created by distance, not absence. The moment attention turns inward sincerely, awareness begins to stir. The collapse reverses, not through force, but through gentle recognition. Revival begins when the mind pauses long enough to notice its own movement. Observation without judgment allows awareness to resurface naturally. The mind starts to remember its original function, not as a controller of life, but as a witness to meaning. This remembrance is subtle, but it carries great power. The silent collapse of inner awareness is not a failure, but a call. It signals that the mind has strayed from its source and is ready to return. When this call is heard, even faintly, the journey back to living awareness begins. The mind does not need to be filled again. It needs to be awakened. When the mind forgets how to see, it does not lose intelligence, memory, or language. It loses depth. Vision becomes limited to appearances, and meaning is reduced to what is immediately useful or familiar. The mind still looks, but it no longer perceives. It gathers impressions without understanding their source, and it interprets reality without touching its essence. This forgetting happens slowly, until seeing becomes automatic rather than conscious. True seeing is not done by the eyes alone. It is an inner act, where awareness meets what is observed. When the mind forgets this, it begins to rely solely on labels and conclusions. It stops encountering reality directly and instead interacts with its own assumptions. What is seen is filtered through habit, expectation, and fear. The world becomes smaller, flatter, and predictable. This forgetting often begins when certainty replaces curiosity. The mind decides it already knows, and in doing so, closes itself to further insight. Familiarity dulls perception. What once invited reflection now passes unnoticed. The extraordinary hides within the ordinary, but the mind no longer pauses long enough to recognize it. Seeing becomes consumption rather than encounter. When the mind forgets how to see, it confuses recognition with understanding. It recognizes forms, faces, and ideas, but does not penetrate them. Meaning remains on the surface. The mind reacts instead of contemplating. It responds quickly, but without depth. This creates a life filled with activity, but lacking intimacy with truth. This condition is strengthened by speed. When the mind moves too quickly, it cannot see clearly. It skims reality rather than entering it. Reflection requires slowness, and insight requires presence. Without these, the mind becomes efficient but blind. It functions well, yet it does not witness what it is doing. Another sign of forgetting seeing is resistance to stillness. When movement stops, the mind feels uneasy because it no longer knows how to observe without distraction. Silence becomes uncomfortable, not because it is empty, but because the mind has forgotten how to meet it. Seeing requires quiet attention, and this skill fades when noise dominates. The mind also forgets how to see when it separates itself from the heart. Seeing is not only intellectual, it is relational. The heart provides sensitivity, while the mind provides clarity. When the two are divided, perception becomes cold and incomplete. The mind analyzes without resonance, and understanding loses warmth and depth. The world appears fragmented. Events feel disconnected, and experiences seem random. The mind struggles to find coherence because it is no longer seeing patterns beneath appearances. It observes parts but misses unity. This loss of wholeness creates confusion, even when information is abundant. The forgetting of seeing also affects how the self is perceived. The mind views itself through roles, identities, and stories rather than presence. It believes it knows itself because it can describe itself. Yet description is not vision. Without inner seeing, the self becomes an idea rather than a lived reality. This condition is often mistaken for clarity. Strong opinions and fixed beliefs give the illusion of understanding. Yet true seeing remains open, flexible, and humble. When the mind forgets how to see, it clings to conclusions because openness feels unsafe. Certainty replaces awareness, and control replaces insight. Yet this forgetting is not permanent. Seeing is not lost. It is neglected. The capacity remains intact, waiting for attention to return. The moment the mind slows down and observes without naming, perception begins to deepen. What was hidden becomes visible, not because it changed, but because awareness returned. Seeing is restored when the mind learns to listen again, not to noise or argument, but to subtle presence. In listening, the mind releases its grip on control. It allows reality to reveal itself rather than forcing interpretation. This shift reopens the door to insight. When the mind remembers how to see, meaning re-enters life quietly. Ordinary moments regain depth, and familiar scenes reveal new layers. The world feels alive again, not because it changed, but because perception did. Seeing restores the relationship between the observer and what is observed. This remembrance also brings humility. The mind realizes how much it overlooked while assuming it understood. This humility does not weaken awareness, it strengthens it. It keeps perception fresh and receptive. The mind learns to approach reality as a student rather than a judge. When the mind forgets how to see, life becomes narrow. When it remembers, life expands. Seeing does not add information. It restores connection. In that connection, awareness awakens, and the mind returns to its true function, not as a collector of images, but as a witness of meaning. The trap of knowledge without insight is subtle because it appears as progress. The mind accumulates facts, concepts, and explanations, yet something essential remains untouched. Information grows, but understanding does not deepen. The individual feels informed, but not transformed. This creates the illusion of clarity while leaving perception unchanged. Knowledge becomes a possession rather than a path, and the mind confuses having answers with seeing truth. When knowledge lacks insight, it settles on the surface of things. Words are learned, but meanings are not tasted. Ideas are repeated, but they are not lived. The mind begins to operate through memorization rather than awareness. In this state, learning continues endlessly, yet wisdom remains distant. What is known does not illuminate the heart, and what is spoken does not reshape the soul. This trap often strengthens the ego. The more the mind gathers, the more it identifies with what it knows. Knowledge becomes a source of pride rather than humility. Instead of opening the mind, it hardens it. The individual defends ideas instead of exploring them. Insight requires openness, but pride closes the inner door through which understanding enters. Knowledge without insight also creates rigidity. The mind clings to frameworks and explanations because they provide a sense of control. Mystery is avoided, and uncertainty is treated as weakness. Yet insight is born in spaces where certainty dissolves. When the mind refuses to sit with what it does not understand, it blocks the very process that leads to deeper knowing. Another danger of this trap is repetition without renewal. The mind cycles through familiar ideas, convinced that repetition equals mastery. Over time, these ideas lose vitality. They no longer provoke reflection or transformation. The mind becomes a storehouse rather than a living field of awareness. Knowledge remains present, but it no longer moves. When insight is absent, knowledge fails to guide action. The individual may know what is right, yet feel disconnected from it. Understanding remains intellectual and does not translate into presence or balance. This creates inner division, where the mind knows, but the heart does not respond. Such division weakens integrity and clarity. The trap deepens when learning becomes an escape. The mind uses knowledge to avoid inner confrontation. By constantly seeking new information, it postpones self-examination. Insight, however, requires turning inward and observing what knowledge reveals about the self. Without this inward turn, learning becomes endless motion without arrival. Knowledge without insight also distorts perception of others. The mind categorizes people through learned labels rather than meeting them directly. Judgment replaces understanding. The individual sees through concepts instead of awareness. This creates distance, as reality is filtered through interpretation rather than presence. In this condition, the mind may speak eloquently yet listen poorly. It prioritizes expression over reception. Insight grows through listening, not asserting. When the mind is filled with its own knowledge, it leaves no space for truth to enter. Silence becomes uncomfortable because it threatens the dominance of stored ideas. True knowledge humbles the mind because it reveals the vastness of what remains unknown. Knowledge without insight does the opposite. It convinces the mind that it has arrived. This false arrival halts growth. The journey of understanding is replaced by attachment to conclusions. Insight requires a different posture. It asks the mind to pause, observe, and allow meaning to unfold. It cannot be forced or collected. When knowledge is approached with reverence rather than ownership, it begins to transform perception. The same ideas take on new depth because they are seen rather than stored. The trap begins to loosen when the mind questions not what it knows, but how it knows. This shift redirects attention from content to awareness. The mind becomes curious about its own movement and limitations. In this curiosity, insight finds space to emerge. As insight returns, knowledge regains life. Concepts begin to point beyond themselves. Words become signs rather than destinations. The mind learns to use knowledge as a bridge instead of a shelter. Understanding deepens not by addition, but by penetration. This transformation reconnects the mind with humility. The individual becomes receptive again, open to learning from silence, experience, and inner observation. Knowledge stops being a badge and becomes a tool for awakening. The heart begins to participate in understanding. The trap of knowledge without insight is not escaped by abandoning learning, but by restoring balance. When insight guides knowledge, both serve awareness. The mind returns to its rightful place, not as a container of ideas, but as a mirror reflecting meaning. Awareness rarely disappears suddenly. It drains away quietly, almost politely, without disturbing the surface of life. The mind continues to think, speak, and decide, yet presence slowly thins. Attention becomes scattered, pulled outward by habit and repetition. What once felt vivid now feels routine. Because nothing visibly breaks, the loss goes unnoticed. This draining begins when attention is constantly borrowed. Every moment the mind is drawn outward without returning inward. Awareness weakens. The mind becomes occupied, but not attentive. It responds to stimuli rather than observing experience. Over time, this outward pull becomes normal, and inward presence feels distant and unfamiliar. Awareness also fades when speed replaces reflection. When life is rushed, moments are passed through instead of entered. The mind moves ahead of experience, always preparing for what comes next. In this forward motion, the present moment is never fully met. Awareness cannot survive where nothing is allowed to settle. Another way awareness drains is through emotional reactivity. When reactions dominate, observation disappears. Anger, fear, and desire take control of attention, leaving no space for witnessing. The mind becomes consumed by response rather than perception. Awareness requires distance, but reactivity collapses that distance. Habit plays a quiet role in this loss. Repeated actions performed without reflection slowly remove awareness from daily life. The mind begins to operate on autopilot. What is familiar no longer invites attention. Awareness fades, not because life is empty, but because it is no longer consciously engaged. The draining of awareness is reinforced by constant noise. When silence is avoided, inner presence weakens. Silence allows awareness to surface naturally. Without it, the mind stays filled with echoes of thought and distraction. Awareness cannot emerge where attention is never at rest. Another unnoticed cause is identification with thought. When the mind believes every thought is true and important, awareness collapses into thinking. Observation is replaced by involvement. The mind becomes lost inside its own narratives. Awareness exists only when thought is seen, not followed blindly. Awareness also drains when meaning is replaced by function. Life becomes about tasks rather than experience. The mind focuses on outcomes and efficiency. In this mode, moments are used rather than lived. Awareness cannot survive when experience is reduced to utility. Comparison further weakens awareness. When attention is constantly measuring against others, presence is lost. The mind leaves its own experience to imagine another. Awareness is always local, always here. Comparison pulls it away from its natural place. The loss continues when the inner world is ignored. Without reflection, feelings accumulate without being understood. The mind avoids turning inward because it feels unfamiliar or uncomfortable. Awareness retreats when it is not welcomed. What is avoided grows distant. Even certainty contributes to this draining. When the mind believes it already knows, it stops observing. Awareness thrives on openness. Fixed conclusions, closed perception. The mind stops seeing what is present and only confirms what it expects. This draining often feels like dullness or restlessness rather than absence. The individual senses something missing but cannot name it. Life feels flat or overly demanding. This feeling is awareness calling for attention, not a flaw in circumstances. Yet awareness is never destroyed. It withdraws when neglected but remains intact beneath the surface. It waits quietly, unaffected by the mind's distractions. The moment attention turns inward, awareness begins to return. Restoration does not require effort, only recognition. Awareness returns when the mind slows and notices its own movement. Observation without judgment allows presence to reappear. Nothing new is added. Something forgotten is remembered. As awareness returns, life regains depth. Ordinary moments feel fuller, and attention feels anchored. The draining stops when the mind remembers how to be present. Awareness was never lost to time. It was simply overlooked. The teaching that restores inner vision does not arrive as new information added to the mind. It appears as a subtle reorientation of attention, a turning inward toward what has always been present but overlooked. Inner vision is not given, it is remembered. The teaching begins by loosening the mind's grip on appearances, inviting it to pause and notice the depth beneath what it already sees. In this pause, perception starts to change quietly, without force. Inner vision awakens when the mind learns to see without claiming ownership over what it sees. The teaching guides the observer away from possession and toward presence. Instead of grasping meanings, the mind allows meanings to reveal themselves. This shift is gentle but profound. It replaces effort with receptivity and transforms looking into witnessing. At the heart of this teaching is silence. Not silence as absence, but silence as clarity. When the noise of interpretation fades, perception becomes transparent. The mind stops projecting and starts receiving. In this receptive state, inner vision begins to function naturally, without strain or ambition. The teaching also restores vision by reconnecting the mind with humility. Inner sight does not open to certainty. It opens to openness. When the mind admits that it does not fully know, perception deepens. This humility creates space for insight to arise without resistance. Vision grows where the mind no longer insists on control. Another aspect of this teaching is learning to see meaning in layers. Inner vision does not settle for the surface of things. It perceives signs within forms and patterns within events. The world becomes a language rather than an object. Each moment carries a message, not because it is extraordinary, but because attention has become refined. The teaching restores vision by dissolving separation between the observer and what is observed. Inner sight recognizes unity beneath diversity. The mind stops standing apart from experience and begins to participate in it consciously. This participation brings intimacy with reality, where understanding is felt rather than concluded. As inner vision returns, the mind learns to distinguish between seeing and thinking. Thought organizes, but vision reveals. The teaching trains the mind to let vision lead and thought follow. This order restores balance. Insight precedes explanation, and meaning arises before interpretation. The restoration of inner vision also depends on patience. Seeing deeply cannot be rushed. The teaching invites the mind to remain with experience long enough for its essence to surface. This patience is not passive, it is attentive. Through sustained presence, what was hidden becomes visible. The teaching emphasizes listening as much as seeing. Inner vision sharpens when the mind listens to subtle movements within. Feelings, intuitions, and quiet recognitions are honored. The mind stops dismissing what cannot be measured. In this listening, perception widens. Another dimension of this teaching is remembrance. Inner vision awakens when the mind remembers its origin as a witness. The teaching gently draws attention back to this role. The mind recognizes itself not as a maker of meaning, but as a mirror through which meaning appears. As vision is restored, the familiar becomes luminous. Ordinary moments reveal unexpected depth. The teaching does not change the world. It changes how the world is seen. What was overlooked becomes significant, and what was taken for granted becomes alive with meaning. This restoration also brings discernment. Inner vision sees without distortion, recognizing truth without exaggeration. The mind becomes less reactive and more precise. It no longer confuses intensity with insight. Calm clarity replaces emotional turbulence. The teaching restores vision by aligning the mind with the heart. Perception becomes whole rather than divided. Understanding is no longer cold or detached. It carries warmth and resonance. This alignment allows vision to guide action with balance and compassion. As inner vision strengthens, confusion diminishes. The mind stops searching compulsively and starts recognizing quietly. Direction becomes clearer, not because choices disappear, but because perception becomes trustworthy. Vision guides movement without forcing it. The teaching that restores inner vision ultimately returns the mind to its natural state. Seeing becomes effortless again. Awareness flows without obstruction. The mind remembers how to witness reality as it is, and in that remembrance, perception becomes alive, clear, and deeply rooted in truth. Breaking free from automatic thinking begins when the mind realizes it has been moving without awareness. Thoughts arise, connect, and conclude before they are ever noticed. This movement feels natural because it has been practiced for years. The mind responds to life through reflex rather than presence. Automatic thinking does not feel like captivity because it feels familiar, and familiarity hides limitation. Automatic thinking is shaped by habit, memory, and repetition. Past experiences quietly dictate present reactions. The mind assumes it is choosing, yet it is often repeating. This repetition creates predictability, not clarity. Life is filtered through old patterns, and perception becomes narrow without the mind realizing it has closed in on itself. The danger of automatic thinking is not error, but absence. The mind remains busy while awareness withdraws. Thoughts replace observation, and reaction replaces insight. The individual lives inside interpretations rather than direct experience. Reality is encountered indirectly, shaped by assumptions rather than presence. Breaking free begins with noticing thought rather than following it. This noticing creates distance. The mind sees its own movement and realizes it does not have to obey every impulse. Awareness steps in quietly, without conflict. In this space, freedom first appears, not as control, but as choice. Automatic thinking thrives on speed. When thoughts move quickly, awareness cannot keep up. Slowing down is essential. Slowness allows perception to deepen. When the mind slows, thought becomes visible. What was unconscious becomes observed, and what is observed begins to loosen its hold. Another step toward freedom is recognizing emotional triggers. Automatic thoughts often arise from unexamined emotions. Fear, desire, and resentment push the mind into reaction. When emotions are observed rather than suppressed, their influence weakens. The mind regains clarity without resistance. The mind often believes thinking is its primary function. In truth, thinking is secondary to seeing. When thought leads, perception follows poorly. When perception leads, thought serves wisely. Breaking free means restoring this order. Awareness becomes primary, and thought becomes a tool rather than a master. Automatic thinking also feeds on identity. The mind defends images of self it has created. Thoughts arise to protect these images. When identity loosens, thought loses urgency. Awareness no longer needs constant justification. Freedom grows as the mind stops guarding imagined selves. Silence plays a vital role in this process. Not silence as emptiness, but as spaciousness. In silence, the mind notices how often it speaks unnecessarily. This noticing does not judge, it reveals. Through silence, awareness strengthens naturally. Breaking free does not mean stopping thought. It means ending identification with thought. Thoughts may continue to arise, but they no longer define reality. The mind observes without being pulled. This observation restores balance and reduces inner conflict. As automatic thinking weakens, presence strengthens. The mind begins to meet each moment freshly. Old conclusions no longer dominate perception. Experience feels immediate rather than filtered. Life regains texture and depth through direct contact. This freedom also brings humility. The mind realizes how much it assumed without seeing. This humility opens perception further. It invites learning without defense. Awareness remains flexible and alive. Breaking free is not achieved once and for all. It is a continual return to presence. Each moment offers the choice to observe or repeat. Freedom grows through consistency, not force. The mind learns through practice, not struggle. Automatic patterns lose their authority. Thought becomes quieter, more precise. Awareness remains steady, even when thought appears. The mind functions without domination. Clarity replaces compulsion. Breaking free from automatic thinking returns the mind to its rightful place. It becomes a servant of awareness rather than its ruler. In this freedom, perception becomes clear, action becomes conscious, and the mind begins to live rather than merely react. Reclaiming the mind's original clarity does not require adding anything new to it. Clarity is not something acquired. It is something uncovered. Beneath layers of habit, assumption, and borrowed thinking, the mind already knows how to be clear. This clarity existed before opinions formed and before identity hardened. The work is not to create vision, but to remove what obscures it. The mind was originally a clear mirror, reflecting reality without distortion. Over time, dust settled on this mirror through repetition, fear, and attachment. Thoughts began to layer themselves over perception, and the mirror forgot its own transparency. Reclaiming clarity means gently cleaning the surface, not breaking the mirror. The mind learns to reflect again, rather than impose. Original clarity returns when the mind stops forcing understanding. Force creates tension, and tension clouds perception. Clarity appears when the mind relaxes into observation. In this relaxed state, perception sharpens naturally. Meaning reveals itself without effort, and insight arises without strain. One of the first signs of returning clarity is simplicity. The mind no longer feels compelled to over-explain or over-analyze. It recognizes what is essential and lets go of excess. Complexity fades, not because reality becomes smaller, but because perception becomes precise. Clarity reduces noise, and restores proportion. Reclaiming clarity also requires honesty with oneself. The mind must see where it pretends to know and where it avoids seeing. This honesty is not harsh. It is gentle and exact. When the mind admits its blind spots, vision widens. What was hidden by certainty becomes visible through humility. As clarity returns, the mind reconnects with presence. It stops living ahead of the moment or behind it. Attention settles where life is actually happening. This presence stabilizes perception. The mind no longer chases meaning. It encounters it directly within experience. Original clarity brings discernment without judgment. The mind learns to distinguish without condemning. It sees differences without creating division. This discernment is calm and balanced. It allows understanding to guide action without emotional excess. The return of clarity also softens inner conflict. Many struggles arise from seeing partially. When perception becomes whole, opposition dissolves. The mind understands why it feels torn and releases unnecessary resistance. Clarity aligns inner movement with outer reality. As clarity deepens, the mind regains trust in perception. Doubt caused by confusion begins to fade. Decisions arise from insight rather than fear. The mind does not rush because it sees. It does not hesitate unnecessarily because it understands. This clarity also reshapes the relationship with thought. Thoughts are no longer treated as absolute truths. They are seen as movements within awareness. The mind uses thought when needed and releases it when it interferes. Thought regains its proper function as a servant, not a ruler. Reclaiming original clarity reconnects the mind with wonder. Familiar things reveal new depth. The ordinary regains richness. This wonder is quiet, not dramatic. It arises from seeing fully rather than seeking novelty. The mind also becomes less defensive as clarity returns. There is less need to protect opinions or identities. Perception is no longer threatened by difference. Openness replaces rigidity. Learning becomes natural again. Clarity restores inner balance. Emotional responses become proportionate. The mind no longer exaggerates or minimizes experience. It responds appropriately because it sees accurately. This balance brings a sense of inner order that feels stable and calm. Reclaimed clarity influences every aspect of life. Speech becomes measured, action becomes deliberate, and silence becomes meaningful. The mind moves with awareness rather than habit. Each moment is met as it is, without distortion. Reclaiming the mind's original clarity is ultimately a return to truthfulness. Not truth as concept, but truth as direct seeing. When the mind remembers how to be clear, it fulfills its true purpose. It becomes a vessel for understanding, a mirror for meaning, and a gateway through which awareness recognizes itself. The mind does not lose its life because it lacks intelligence, but because it forgets its purpose. When knowledge is separated from insight, awareness slowly fades, and clarity becomes buried beneath habit and repetition. Yet nothing essential is ever destroyed. The mind only drifts away from its original clarity, waiting to be remembered. When attention returns inward, when perception is allowed to deepen, and when knowledge is approached as a path rather than a possession, the mind awakens again. This awakening does not make life louder or more complicated. It makes it truer. The mind regains its light not by gathering more, but by seeing more clearly. In this clarity, knowledge becomes life once again, and awareness resumes its rightful place at the center of understanding.